I stood there, my rucksack heavy on my shoulders, watching Emily's face crumple as the reality of my deployment hit her. Her eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were clouded with tears. I wanted to reach out to hold her close and tell her everything would be okay, but the truth was, I didn't know if it would be. "Jake, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Isn't there any way you can stay?" I swallowed hard, fighting back my own emotions. I can't. This is our chance to get ahead, to start fresh when I come back. She nodded, but I could see the fear etched in every line of her face. We'd talked about this for months. Her moving in with Sarah back home, using my deployment pay to clear our debts. It all made sense on paper, but standing here now, it felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind. "We'll start that family when I get back," I promised, trying to inject some hope into the moment. "Just think, in a year's time we could be decorating a nursery." Emily managed a weak smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. As the final boarding call echoed through the hangar, she threw her arms around me, burying her face in my chest. I could feel her body shaking with sobs. "I love you," she murmured, her words muffled against my uniform. "I'll be waiting for you, Jake. I promise." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, trying to memorize every detail of this moment. "I love you too, Em. More than anything." Pulling away was the hardest thing I'd ever done. As I walked towards the plane, I turned back one last time. Emily stood there, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. The look in her eyes, a mix of love, fear, and something I couldn't quite name, burned itself into my memory. As the plane took off, carrying me towards an uncertain future, I closed my eyes and held onto that final image of Emily. It would have to be enough to get me through the long months ahead. So I remember those first 2 months like they were yesterday. The scorching heat of the desert, the constant tension in the air, and the weight of my gear were nothing compared to the heaviness in my heart. Every day I'd count down the hours until I could call Emily, desperate to hear her voice and connect with the life I'd left behind. At first, our calls were a lifeline. She'd tell me about her day, ask about mine, and we'd talk about our plans for the future. But as the weeks wore on, something changed. Her responses became shorter, colder. The eagerness in her voice faded, replaced by a detached tone that set my teeth on edge. "I need space, Jake," she said one night, her voice crackling over the satellite connection. I almost laughed. Space? I was literally on the other side of the world. How much more space did she need? The excuses started piling up. She was too tired to talk. She had plans with friends. Work was keeping her busy. Each time I swallowed my disappointment and told myself it was normal, that the distance was hard on both of us. But then I started gassing gaps in her stories. She'd mentioned going out but skirt around the details of where and with whom. When I asked about her day, she'd give vague answers that left me with more questions than before. One name kept cropping up, Max. I remembered him from before I left, always hanging around Emily, his eyes following her a little too closely for my comfort. Now, he seemed to be a constant presence in her life. "Oh, Max helped me fix the sink," she'd say casually. Or I ran into Max at the store. Each mention of his name was like a punch to the gut. The jealousy I felt was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. I'd never been the type to doubt Emily, but now thousands of miles away, every innocent comment seemed loaded with hidden meaning. I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on my mission and trust in our relationship, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. It festered, growing stronger with each stilted conversation and unanswered text. Finally, driven by a desperation I'm not proud of, I made a decision that would change everything. Using some of the tech available to us, I cloned Emily's phone. I told myself it was just to ease my mind, that I'd find nothing and feel guilty for doubting her. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first message I intercepted hit me like a physical blow. "Hey babe, I'll see you after work. I want me to save you any of my leftovers." It was from Max, and the casual intimacy of it made me feel sick. I scrolled through message after message, each one worse than the last. Emily and Max discussing their relationship, making plans for the future, my future. They talked about having a baby together, using the money I was earning on this godforsaken deployment to build their life. The betrayal was complete and devastating. The woman I loved, the one I'd promised to cherish and protect, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, cruel, selfish, and completely indifferent to the pain she was causing. I stopped eating. Sleep became a distant memory. I lost weight rapidly, my uniform hanging loose on my frame. My fellow soldiers noticed, but couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I tell them that while I was risking my life, My wife was in the arms of another man. The only thing that kept me going was the constant flow of messages from Emily's phone. Each one was a knife to the heart, but I couldn't stop reading. It was like picking at a scab, knowing it would hurt but unable to resist. "Max is so much better in bed," one message read. "He treats me better, gives me what I want." I stared at the words, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. They discussed their matching tattoos, a permanent mark of their betrayal etched into their skin. They talked about the things they'd bought with my money, laughing about how I'd never know. The Emily I knew, the one I'd loved since we were kids, was gone. This new Emily was a stranger, someone capable of inflicting pain without a second thought. And Max was living the life that should have been mine, sleeping in my bed, spending my money, planning a future with my wife. As I sat there, surrounded by the harsh realities of war, I realized that the greatest battle I'd ever faced wasn't on this foreign soil. It was the one waiting for me back home, where the ruins of my marriage and the shattered pieces of my heart lay scattered. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over Emily's contact. The familiar ache in my chest returned, but this time it was accompanied by a surge of cold determination. I'd spent weeks wallowing in misery, but now it was time to act. With a deep breath, I opened our joint bank account app. In a few taps, I'd frozen the account, so Emily wouldn't be able to touch a cent. I moved on to our other financial accounts, methodically changing passwords and security questions. Each click felt like another brick in the wall I was building between us. As I worked, my phone buzzed with incoming messages from Emily. I ignored them, focusing on my task. And when I was done, I blocked her number and every social media account she had. The silence that followed was deafening, but oddly satisfying. So I lay back on my bunk, staring at the ceiling of my quarters. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. It wasn't happiness, I doubted I'd feel that for a long time, but it was something. A cold, hard satisfaction that curled in my gut. Days passed, and I watched from afar as my plan unfolded. Through mutual friends back home, I heard snippets of Emily's growing panic. Her frantic attempts to access our accounts, her confusion turning to anger, then to fear as she realized she was cut off. I imagined her sitting in my house, surrounded by all the things she'd bought with my money. The designer shoes she'd bragged out to Max, the expensive handbags, the new car she'd insisted on getting. All of it would be worthless to her now. One night, as I lay in bed, my phone lit up with a message from an old high school friend. She'd seen Emily at the local diner, waiting tables. The same place she'd worked before we got married, before I'd supported her through college. The image brought a grim smile to my face. But it wasn't enough. I wanted Emily and Max to feel the full weight of their betrayal. So I reached out to more friends back home, setting my next plan in motion. "Hey, remember that diner I was working at?" I typed to my buddy Steve. "Think you could round up some guys and cause a bit of trouble there?" Steve was quick to respond. "What kind of trouble are you thinking?" "Nothing illegal," I assured him. "Just make life difficult. Complain about the service, leave bad reviews. Maybe organize a few dine and dash incidents." I could almost see Steve's grin through the phone. "Consider it done, man. We got your back." Over the next few weeks, I got regular updates from Steve and others. They told me about Emily's frustration as customer after customer complained about her service, about the manager's growing impatience, about the day Emily's car was repossessed, leaving her to beg rides from co-workers. And then came the news I'd been waiting for. Emily had lost her job at the diner. The final straw had been a group of guys who'd run out without paying their bill, a bill Emily was now responsible for. But I wasn't done. I'd heard through the grapevine that Max was working at a local garage. It didn't take much to convince some of my military buddies to swing by for some unnecessary repairs, then raise hell about the quality of work. With each piece of news, each small victory, I felt a little stronger. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but it was dulled by this new sense of purpose. So I was no longer just a victim of Emily and Max's betrayal. I was the architect of their downfall. As I lay in my bunk each night, I imagined Emily and Max struggling to make ends meet, their dream of a future together crumbling under the weight of financial stress. It wasn't the future I'd imagined for myself, playing the role of a silent puppet master, but it was the hand I'd been dealt. And I was determined to play it to the bitter end. The plan wasn't something I rushed. Anger can make you do stupid things if you act on it too fast. My mother once told me that. I guess she was right. So when I got the messages from her and Max, my head spun for days, flipping between wanting to disappear and wanting to burn everything down around them. Option 2-1. Gathering everything took time though, not just the screenshots from her phone, but timestamps, dates, bits and pieces I'd collected mentally over months, back when I thought I was going crazy, overthinking it all. So when you're thousands of miles away and can't confront someone face to face, you start double-checking everything you remember. Patterns in her texts, shorter FaceTime calls, always an excuse for why she couldn't visit me on base. It painted a perfect picture, the kind you wished you were wrong about, but every new piece of evidence just confirms your gut. It wasn't enough for me to know what they did, sitting there, reading their dirty little messages. No, people like that, they deserve to be exposed. If I just let them fade into each other's arms, make their own miserable life, they'd never suffer the way I had, tossing and turning in some hellhole overseas, wondering if it was all in my head. They deserve to feel eyes on them, judging, whispering, just like the weight they dumped on me. I typed it out like a damn novel, weaving through screen caps, lining everything up for context. A timeline of lies, text bubbles drenched with their grinning deceit. Click, 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 every message captured in vivid detail. Miss you. Can't wait to see you again. When he's away, I'm yours completely. Those small betrayals that cut deeper the more I read them. The more I saw what I thought had been genuine slipping through my fingers. When I clicked post, tagging every mutual friend we had, my hand didn't even shake. Actually, it felt steady, like I had been practicing this move for years. All this time in the service, carefully planning operations, this wasn't any different. Stick to a mission, see it through until the end. I didn't even need to wait long before the fallout hit her like a truck. The texts started flowing in from friends. People we both knew began reaching out. Some shocked, others confused. A few even had the nerve to ask me if it was real. But none of them were defending her. Not a single one. That's when I realized there's a line people won't cross. Cheating once is a mistake. Sure, people can forgive that. But a whole affair, that's on a whole other level, especially with its husband getting shot at in the middle of the goddamn desert. Sympathy evaporated for her pretty fast. Emily always liked being liked, relied on it honestly. Seeing her crumble under the weight of public scorn, it was almost too satisfying. I mean, was I proud? Hell no. What kind of man has to sink to that level, torching his ex-wife's social life? But was it necessary? Absolutely. First came the messages where she tried to explain herself. Of course she did. I wasn't happy you weren't here. Then guilt-tripping. Trying to blame the deployment for the affair. Right, because I volunteered for repeat deployments, for the lovely chance to get riddled with shrapnel so we could pay off her credit card debt. Whatever sympathy I had left for her drained completely by the time I read all her pathetic justifications. Then, when the public scorning set in, I knew it hit her real hard. Social media and the small town we came from are a cruel combo. Everyone rotated in the same circles, chatted at the same spots. She couldn't hide. And things got worse for her. I had cut off her credit lines, so she started missing payments. When the bank came for the car, it wasn't like she could beg Max for help. Last I heard, he loved the thrill of pulling a married woman into his orbit, but financial responsibility wasn't his thing either. They lasted maybe another month before they split, with him cheating on her, of course. I remember sitting with my laptop in a shack overseas, cracking a smile when a mutual friend posted about seeing Emily trekking it on foot. Talk about poetic justice. She wasn't content to just sink, though. Her desperation reached me through my chain of command. She managed to send messages accusing me of abandonment, claiming I'd left her without anything, and ran off to fill my pockets while she spiraled. Normally, that kind of shit raises red flags in the military. Husbands being reported for abandoning wives back home are taken seriously. But my commander, old guy battle-hardened, had seen this play out too many times. A nasty smirk grew on his face when he glanced at her complaints. "She's barking up the wrong tree," he said. That was that. She could scream all she wanted at me ruining her life, but it wouldn't make a difference. The military didn't care much for the sob stories of cheaters. I stayed untouchable. So, I sat there watching her drown, wondering when, if ever, any kind of guilt would creep in. Part of me half expected it. Maybe I'd feel some kind of morally driven need to help her. At least back when we were younger. There was a time I would have caved and offered a lifeline. But after everything, I felt cold, detached, like I'd locked that version of myself away somewhere far off. Even when she was surfaced with that bombshell. One new number later and Emily leaves me another voicemail. Like she hadn't screamed at anyone who'd listened days before about how awful I was. This one was quieter, desperate. It started with the simple news. I'm pregnant. Tom. I sat on the edge of my bunk and let that sink in for a second. Part of me leaned into what could have been. Could have been our child. Could have been us in a different world. The dream we had was obliterated, lying there in broken pieces. I'd come home ready to start something good, something real. Max, of course, she added, like that would make me I don't know what. Sympathize. Congratulate her? Her? That's your mess to clean up, I said after swallowing all the emotion in a single gulp. I don't even know if she hung up or cried into the silence of the line. I didn't care anymore. She might have thought she'd twist the knife by telling me that, but honestly, it just confirmed that we were done. There was no salvaging anything out of the wreckage she'd caused. I hadn't heard from Emily in months. Not since I'd shut down every avenue of escape for her, cash-strapped her and Max to that hopeless pit of their own making. I figured I'd scrubbed her out of my life for good, maxed her out of existence in a way. Then, out of nowhere, her name lit up my phone screen like a ghost from the past trying to claw its way to the surface. I almost didn't answer. Stared at the number hidden behind a blocked ID, my thumb hovering over decline. But there was something too satisfying in that moment of power, holding the phone like it dictated our whole story. She was chasing me now. When I heard her voice, it wasn't the Emily I knew, or thought I knew, at least. That woman had fire, manipulative, selfish, but she had teeth. The Emily on the other end barely sounded alive. Battered down, like life had sandblasted her smooth of everything she used to be, even her pride. I need help, she blurted before I could say anything. One breath, shaky like she was chewing gravel before coughing it up. Help? My brain latched onto that word so hard I almost laughed. Emily, who drained life out of me for years like it was owed to her, was begging. I didn't interrupt, it was kind of entertaining in a sinister way. Just let her ramble as I twisted the knife in my own mind. So I'm going to lose the apartment, Max. Maxie's gone now. He stopped showing up. Her words came in broken pieces. Like she expected me to fill in the blanks for her mess. She was practically groveling, trying to bait me into feeling sorry for her. The smell of desperation seeped through the phone. She tried to act like she was still someone I should care about, the person I once thought was my wife. Once. For a second, ignored at me, this pathetic plea unraveling in knots. The old habit of giving a damn tugged at the edges of my conscience, but only for a flicker. Like muscle memory that forgot to stay dead. And then just as quickly it turned sour. All I could think about was the nights I'd been overseas. My heart shredded halfway across the world while she was laughing in bed with Max. Thought about how she had drained my accounts, leaving me with nothing but debt and lies. This woman didn't deserve sympathy, she deserved the full weight of the mess she created. Jake, please. Aye, she started again, her voice soft cracking. I cut her off. Brutal, sharp. I'm not your savior. The line went dead silent after that. Maybe she thought she could wriggle inside my head like she used to. But it wasn't about Emily or anything else anymore. I was finished letting her make me feel responsible for her bad decisions. Her fall from grace wasn't my problem. Eventually, I clicked end. Threw the phone onto the counter where it slid and clattered against the tile. Just like that, whatever she thought still bound us shattered along with it. By the time the divorce papers got finalized, it almost felt like a formality. I wasn't expecting some grand closure moment. There wasn't any dramatic courtroom scene. Just me signing my name and sending the papers like any other mundane task. It felt hollow, but I guess that's how endings are sometimes. Numb, almost pointless. I'll be honest, there was a jolt of relief when I read through the last document confirming that I wouldn't be financially responsible for that kid. Max's kid. A couple months ago that would have sent me into a rage, thinking about him, their future together, their supposed life. But by now I couldn't even muster real anger. If anything, it felt like someone else's twisted soap opera I had the good sense to walk out on halfway through. And yet, for all the relief the paperwork brought on the surface, the toll weighed down like mud clinging to my boots, refusing to let go. Every so often, an old memory would sneak up on me. Uninvited, the nights we laid out across the living room floor, planning all the could-bes of our life together, dreams of kids, a house by the woods, vacations. They came back, vivid but empty now, nothing but crimes against my past self. I'll admit there were times when I wished it had all been different. That I hadn't lost those years to someone who ripped out my insides the way she did. The mundane moments haunted the worst. Her laughing at some ridiculous sitcom or us cooking breakfast together on lazy Saturday mornings. It wasn't even the dramatic stuff that chewed at my bones, but those stupid, normal, nothing memories. That's when it hit hardest. The nights, alone in that goddamn apartment, after I'd scrubbed my place of every trace of her, thinking I'd exorcised the shadows. But they lingered. Faint. I guess that's just the price you pay for loving someone completely, even when they weren't worth it. I ended up in therapy, not that I advertised it, but it felt like my head was going to explode if I didn't get it out of there. So I thought I could cowboy up and tough the wreckage out on my own. The therapist didn't have much to say the first few sessions. I mostly did the talking, dissecting the things I'd tried to bury for months. Old wounds. Why it wasn't enough to just expose Emily and Max and see their world crash. Why revenge hadn't filled whatever hollow ache was left behind. But I think I realized then it never could. Retribution wasn't the answer I'd banked on, though I'd craved that outcome like a damn drug when it first hit. It was satisfying for sure, watching those two begin to implode under the weight of their own selfishness. Max skipping town, Emily scrambling for rent, it was like watching a fire I'd set myself. But at the end of it, the flames burned out, sure, but I was still left standing in the grey dust of what we used to be. And that grief, even stewing in my gut, that was harder to shake. Months later, maybe even a year, I sat in this bar, a quiet one where people left you alone. It was late, music soft enough not to drag me into a headache. I hadn't seen or heard from Emily since that last call, but word got around in our small town. I knew her life was circling the drain. She'd lost her job not long after Max bailed. Rumor had it she was living with some distant cousin out of desperation. A whole different chapter to a book one slammed shut. I didn't know how I should have felt about that. There wasn't any satisfaction left. So not really. Revenge had hollowed itself out like biting into a fruit, only to find it's all dried up on the inside. Her misery didn't fuel my happiness, and it certainly didn't heal anything that broke between us. I suppose I'd learned something, though. I wasn't wrong. That was my quiet triumph. Emily's betrayal wasn't my failure. That's probably the biggest takeaway from the whole mess. The therapist kept pushing that idea, drilling into me that it was her choices, not mine, that ruined everything. On some primal level, I wanted to be the villain, to wrest back control, because if all I was the victim, then I had nothing. But turns out I wasn't even the villain in her narrative. I was just some guy she wronged. I finished my whiskey and glanced out the window toward the streetlights flickering in the haze of rain. A strange sense of freedom settled in. A quiet one. Not the victorious moment some guys celebrate when they dump their baggage with a clap over a beer. Mine felt smaller. Closed out, in a way. Still, even as I walked out of that bar into the cool night air, jacket zipped against the dampness, I knew I was leaving Emily behind, not because she had lost or suffered, but because I'd finally stopped looking over my shoulder.